I'm joined by Fintan O'Toole of the 42.ie to talk about the club football at the weekend. Fintan, we'll just jump straight into it. The Tyrone Football Championship. Nobody's done back to back in Tyrone since 2005, but Trillick are back into a final. They saw off Cole Island. Matty Donnelly apparently brilliant again, and we saw them on TV winning that penalty shootout not so long ago. The goals came from Liam Gray and Simon Garrity. On the other side then, Dungannon saw off Ergil Kieran, who people will know from Peter Hart. But the thing that stands out for Dungannon is that this is the third game in a row that they've won after extra time, which is quite incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's an amazing stat, and they haven't been in the final in a good while. They haven't won it longer again, so they are probably the team that are showing up that this Tyrone Championship is kind of so open. And we've spoken with this before, that it just feels like there's a lot of different sides that kind of have a chance of winning it. But very, very impressive side, and like the thing about watching on TV was that when Ergo got the second goal, it looked like that was going to be an absolutely key score, and Kieran McGinley got the goal, but they didn't score after that. Dungannon had 4 points out of reply. I just think, for a club side to do that, to reel your points in after extra time against a kind of maybe more fancied and more kind of an illustrious club name, kind of says a lot about the kind of resolve you have, and that must be, I don't know, kind of muscle memory, is it? The memories, that extra time experience that you've been through in the last few weeks, that there's no panic, and a brilliant point to win it. The good cornerback, look, he's obviously kind of a specialist, kind of free taker, but the way he slotted it over and the way they celebrated afterwards, and it was brilliant. And I suppose the other thing is about it as well, that I just thought it was great that at least some of their fans were there to see it, because obviously the rules are different in the six counties at the moment, and look, it was only a couple of hundred, but it was kind of nice to have the cameras turning to the crowd, and that there was kind of a pocket of fans there, because they haven't won a semi-final in 33 years. I mean, that's the kind of one. I mean, I'm sure it's going to happen over the next few weeks unless this decision gets reversed. Teams are going to end barren spells or make major breakthroughs, and there's going to be no one there to kind of share it with. So I thought that was kind of a nice thing for them, and their club to kind of savour after that game.
Yeah, a poor omen for them is the last time they got to that final in 1986. They lost to Trillick, but we'll see how that goes, because it probably does feel like they're on a bit of a magical journey. They needed an equaliser in their last two games just to take to extra time, and as we said, they did that again here. So it probably has that feeling. Paul Donaghy has been on fire, and I think he's scored maybe 8 points again. He has 31 points in 3 games, which is fair going. And this is a knockout competition. There's an awful lot of competitions out there that are group stages, and you get that second chance to build and go again. So that's really, really impressive. The Mayo Championship over the weekend. Now, you were telling me that you bought the stream for Westport and Breaffy, but it went down. It went down midway through the second half, didn't it? And I believe that caused an awful lot of trouble for the Mayo County Board, who had to refund people and possibly even show the game for free on Sunday. Then the other semi-final.
Yeah, I just had the Tyrone semi-finals on RTE, and just said I'd paid a fiver for this game, just because I suppose there's some big county names involved in both sides, and it just seemed to have good potential of the games that were on. I haven't been following it, to be honest, too closely over the last couple of weeks as the Mayo GAT coverage, but it seems like there has been some issues. And look, I have some sympathy for them. I mean, I saw the Kerry PRO, I don't see this, Leona Twist kind of tweeted basically they would have had issues the previous week. There is a lot of county boards had to kind of think on their feet a bit with this and get systems in place pretty quickly over the last few weeks. It seems like people are being maybe a bit kind of unforgiving, but I think maybe the problem here is the fact that it seems to be kind of serial issues with the Mayo. I think they were very quick in the apology, in kind of issuing an apology on Saturday night, and then they provided, I think, the intermediate and senior semi-finals that were scheduled for Sunday, that they were kind of free of charge. Game itself, I suppose Breaffy, the kind of favourites, it kind of just struck me as a game from the kind of bit I saw and kind of reading about how the second half went, that the kind of more experienced side kind of got over the line. It's kind of interesting that both Mayo semi-finals over the weekend, both sides reversed results from the group stages by narrow enough margins,
Isn't that typical thing whereby when you win a game by a narrow margin, you just kind of, it's like, we'll go out and we'll do the same thing again. You lose by a point, and you really do analyse what went wrong, and maybe not tear up the script, but you really do try and fix what went wrong.
Yeah, well, that was captured, I think, very nicely by Ray Dempsey, the Knockmore manager. He said it was the best thing that happened to them. He said if they'd beaten Ballina in the group stages and beat Ballintober last week, he reckons they would have gone out yesterday and expected it to happen for them. Whereas because they had lost to Ballina, they had to go and make it to happen. Now I know that's just the language he's using, but there is something in that in terms of I suppose kind of reacting and kind of maybe tweaking things a bit differently. Obviously Breaffy managed without Seamus O'Shea, who was kind of a major absentee.
His wife went into labour apparently. That's what I'm hearing. From Mayo.
I just heard a line about that. The commentator said that before the game. But I mean, they still, you still look at their team sheet. Obviously Aidan O'Shea is the big name at one end of the pitch. Even though he was probably well held really by Lee Keegan, came into it in the last few minutes. You're probably Henley in goal. But I think this is their fourth final in 8 seasons now. But looking at it, I think it's the fact that Conor O'Shea's a bit older. Matthew Rowan is kind of an option at midfield. Like Michael Hall is a player, who's had kind of Mayo under 21 and maybe a few kind of senior opportunities. So they look to me like they have a better balance kind of around the middle third now, and it's maybe not exactly all dependent on the older O'Shea's. And then there was a guy, to be honest, I hadn't come across him or hadn't realised where he was from until the weekend. Was Colin Flynn, a Longford native who I think was on the Underdogs a couple of years ago, the TG Carr programme.
Yeah, he's 34, 35 now, Ballymahan native.
Yeah, but he's a great boot in him, really, really accurate from free taking. And I mean, you see the score in there, 15-13. Westport had a couple of good forwards, in fairness. Keith Kilkelly and Colin Moran, who Moran will be on the fringes of the Mayo seniors as well. But Flynn just was the top scorer, and that was kind of the difference. I mean, I know you've probably been looking closely at the tip hurling stuff with kind of Killadangan going for third final and whatever into seasons, and the kind of psychology of that. I mean, Breaffy is the interesting one now, isn't it? Castlebar are gone, Ballintober are gone, and this is their fourth final, as I said, in 8 seasons. Knockmore have won it a long time. They're a big traditional kind of superpower. But you wonder if they win it now, will it be a case that they will say, well, we just got all the big names together at the right time of the year. We kind of had a good run. Maybe preparation wasn't as disjointed, but it definitely feels like it's a massive, massive opportunity for them to kind of finally get over the line. Yeah,
and if they do, Knockmore will probably feel a little bit like we've done a lot of the hard work, getting rid of Ballina and getting rid of Ballintober, who of course have won so many.
Absolutely, recently. Yeah. But they lost the final themselves a few years back to Castlebar, so maybe it's a bit of a change in the guard in Mayo. I don't know when the last time that either Ballintober or Castlebar didn't contest the final. I think Westport regard that as the coming side. We were chatting a couple of weeks ago to Colin Gallen. He was talking about the kind of underage strides they were making. It still was kind of maybe there for them on Saturday night. And I know you can kind of talk the whole time about potential and there being more chances again. But I think there were some great info pictures actually I saw of Lee Keegan looking fairly crestfallen at the final whistle.
He mightn't think they're great photos now, but.
Sorry?
He mightn't think they're great photos, but
no. I suppose I'm just saying it as more kind of a neutral observer. It was great, kind of captured the emotion of it. But I wonder, did it kind of point to the fact that he probably knows that these opportunities maybe don't come around very often, and it was a tight game. It was kind of maybe there for them on a couple of occasions in the second half, but just couldn't quite get level. And suddenly push on for the victory.
So a few points about this. Obviously they had both teams, Breaffy beating Westport 15-13, Knockmore beating Ballina 17-13. So both had lost to the opponents in the group stages. But also Westport and Ballina, they had pretty simple quarterfinals against Ahmore and the Nail. Whereas Breaffy and Knockmore had to come through games against Balladreen and Ballintober. So that would have also steeled them a little bit more. They're probably operating at a little bit of a higher level, having had a tougher game. And Breaffy came out of the traps very quickly, 5-0 ahead after 8 minutes, kept Westport at arm's length from then on. They hit a lot of wides. At one point, would you think that the fact that Lee Keegan stayed back on Aidan O'Shea for long spells, and that's decommissioning him as an attacking weapon, do you kind of think pretty quickly when you see yourself 5-0 down, do you need to sort of say we're going to need to gamble here, and if Aidan O'Shea does damage, which he invariably does at club level for sure, and in most county games, it's you just have to chance it.
Yeah, they pushed them. I suppose the thing was they actually did get back into it. It was 5-4 by the first water break, so maybe by then they're thinking, right, we settled and we can keep them in there. But it's just an absolute dilemma, isn't it? To kind of stick or twist. They probably would have preferred to see O'Shea play midfield, because then you could put Keegan on him and Keegan's further up the pitch, and he's kind of more influential, kind of around the middle third. I suppose if they had said beforehand that they would limit O'Shea to a point from play, they probably would have thought, probably get enough done around the pitch. And like I said, it was there a couple of occasions. They were only trailing by a point at junctures during the second half, but just couldn't get level. And every time, just seen Breaffy were able to just kind of tack it on and get over the line. But I think the point you're making about kind of being more skilled and more experienced is a good one. They won pretty handily in the end against Ballyderreen last week, but it didn't feel like that type of game. Just watching a bit of it on RT, there was 13 points I think in it by the end, but there was maybe only about 5 or 6 was it maybe with maybe about 5 minutes left, and they kind of pulled away, got a couple of goals. So definitely it's turned around a lot for them from that first defeat against Westport, and the game against Castlebar seems like a big one because they were maybe a bit of their kind of bogey team in terms of local rivals. They'd beaten them in a couple of county finals. I think that was the game they needed to win to kind of stay alive in the championship. Managed to do that. They ended up beating Charlestown. So it's coming together nicely for them now. It's a 2-week break now at least. I'd say that's the big thing now. With a lot of counties seem to be doing that, don't they? It's played week on week, but they're trying to give maybe the finalists kind of a 2-week break. So they've done that, let's say, in Tip hurling and Mayo football. Dublin hurling, as you know, as well. So,
which is only right.
Yeah, absolutely. But must be a great place to be, to kind of got through that series of battles, and you can kind of rest up now, and obviously not too much work to kind of be done in terms of getting set for the final.
Yeah, and then Kevin McLaughlin was on fire for Knockmore in that win over Ballina. Aidan Orme as well, another key performer. Peter Naughton, really good, caused problems all day, and I think Pádraig O'Mora has to be moved back on him.
And again, that game seemed like it was a big case of the strong start. I think they were up 11-2 at one stage.
And they put 12 men behind the ball and could just break from then on. They're very good at that.
It's kind of just an interesting trend the way it worked out. The two winners tight games the week before, and then they hit the ground running the following week to kind of get over the line. Yeah,
absolutely. And we mentioned Colin Flynn there and his Longford blood. We might as well mention the Longford Football Championship. The Slashers, Longford Slashers beat Father Manning Gales 1-9 to 1-7, and then Mullinyochta, they beat Columkills. So Columkills were in great position here. Ref played something like 10 minutes of injury time out of nowhere is what I'm hearing, and Mullinyochta got a goal 8 minutes into that to win the game there. So fairly devastating stuff for Columkill, who I think they had deposed them last year, hadn't they?
Yeah, one thing you notice that I think with water breaks it's guaranteed nearly a minute minimum of 6 to 7 minutes now, isn't it, of injury time in games? It definitely has gone up. I found in the kind of games we've been on over the last 10 or 8 seems a bit much, but not exactly sure. Kind of about the stoppages, but obviously the big thing along for the weekend was last night's ruling with the DRA that Killoo were kind of back into it and kind of reinstated, because I think it's the two clubs you mentioned, Mullinyochta and Longford Slashers. They're through to the semi-finals, but there's a serious backlog on the other side of the draw, and it's kind of interesting. I think the way this has happened in a few of the Leinster counties through the mini lockdown that was in Kildare, Laois and Offaly, and through this I suppose suspension saga that has kind of dogged Longford. It feels like those 4 counties that right now their club campaigns are going to go right up to the inter-county resumption, and there's not going to be much breathing space. So probably a bit of a headache for the likes of Pádraig Davis and Jack O'Connor and these managers in trying to assemble their teams, because obviously it's from next Monday they can get their sides together, but there seems to be there's a lot more games being played in their counties compared to how much the speed and the pace with which other counties in Leinster are probably progressing and getting things completed.
Doesn't it feel a little bit like Longford is shooting itself in the foot here, because there'll be bad feeling from this saga for many years to come?
Yeah, I mean, look, it was fairly straight, wasn't it? The language the DRA used, there wasn't much room for kind of ambiguity and kind of interpreting it in terms of who they were kind of laying the blame at. I mean, look, not knowing the kind of details, I suppose, about this under-16 game, but it all just does not seem good in terms of your senior champions kind of being hit with a 48-week ban over kind of a small enough fine. And there's the added thing, I think, of the year that's in it. It's probably the last thing teams wanted. I think this probably maybe influences emotionally how people view these things. Everyone's thinking, everyone should be allowed to play this year. There's no way a team should be kind of slapped with a 48-week ban. So it's probably not a good look for them in terms of the delay that has happened in their championship and the kind of controversy that has ensued.
Absolutely. So just to run through the Donegal championship quickly, Guido beat Sean McCool's, but only by a point, and that was a last gasp point from Keane Mulligan to send them through. against Kilcar. It'll be St. Eunan's absolutely pulverised Bundoran 8-11 to 6 points. Quaylen Ward, Sean McGettigan, Pádraig McGettigan, Owen McGee and Niall McDonnell and Conor O'Donnell with 2 as well. So that's a heavy beating. Naomh Conall, who got through last year and into the Ulster campaign, they beat Glenfin 2-16 to 5 points. Charlie McGuinness and Ethan O'Donnell hit the goals, and then Kilcar, I think they were well ahead, and St. Michael's came back. It was 3-14 to 3-12 for a finish. So some fairly, they're almost troubling scorelines. They like that 8-11 put in by St. Eunan's. You just hate to even see that sort of a scoreline.
Yeah, like that's an absolute massacre, isn't it? In terms of just, I don't know, is there a level at what stage it's a certain amount of goals go in that it really just kind of jumps out at you, doesn't it, in terms of kind of a GA result, and especially at that stage of the competition. But I think that stands out there is just the kind of the stature and standing of the 4 clubs that have reached the semi-finals. I mean, you've got all the big names in terms of the county winners of the last few seasons and all that, and in terms of kind of big names involved with clubs from Declan Bonner senior squad, So I mean, I'm not sure what the kind of television plans is for the next few weeks, but definitely looks like a couple of those games could get live coverage. Huge potential, I think, in terms of the clashes. What's the breakdown? It's Guido Kilcar in one of them, is it? And then
it's going to be Guido against Kilcar. So then you're going to have Eunan's against Naomh Conall. Yeah, so they're actually massive clashes. Very be
absolutely,
good to see a couple of them on telly. The Down Championship this weekend, Kilcoo beat Ross Trevor, and it was 2 goals in the first quarter to sort of take control there. Paul Devlin scored a penalty and Jerome Johnson he finished one as well, and that was a nice clash of Pete McGrath against Mickey Moran there. Mickey Moran coming out on top. 2 men in their 70s there. Still, what's that term they used? I don't know. I can't think of the term they use for old men when they stay going. But either way, that's a standout result. Clonduff then with Warren Point, that went to penalties 4-2 to Warren Point. Are you enjoying all these penalty shootouts?
Yeah, like I mean, I suppose probably not bringing up a bad thing for you, but the hurling one that I saw last week, Borsley Drum, was the first one I'd actually been at when I'd actually seen it. I don't ever watch ones on TV, like, to be honest. I mean, the Trilly Kelly Clara one was brilliant, and
the Antrim one in the dark.
Yeah, like I suppose there is a long-term kind of a debate to be had about is it fair or not, but I think for this year there's no choice. I think you have to have them. I'm not sure, to be honest, about the golden score. I mean, I think that could be really unfortunate for teams. It could be just one passage of play. Like, I think over the course of 5 kicks, you probably, or 5 shots, it's probably maybe you have a better chance. I just think something like that. Like, I know James Woodlock was saying last week that he thinks it should just go back to 2 more additional 5-minute periods. But I think for this year, in terms of the obvious pressures on the calendar and the space, I think it had to come in terms of the kind of finish on the day. And I think it definitely feels better than the 45 or 65 competitions that were kind of suggested. I mean, it was there. It was our Walsh Cup game a couple of years ago, Kilkenny Wexford, and like there was a Limerick Clare League final finish with that.
I remember Longford Mead in some pre-season competition had one as well. Yeah. But actually, just a point now, you're talking about James Woodlock and the hurling side of things, saying he would have preferred 2 more sets of 5 minutes after the first 20 minutes of extra time didn't separate the teams. But then a week later, Drum and Inch were out again in the hurling championship and were really flat, having just played the extra 20 minutes. So playing more again is going to make them even flatter still. So I don't know if I go along with that.
Yeah, like that's true. I guess I just wonder, in terms of if we go back to a normal season, and in terms of the breaks between games, will people be as kind of happy with it, or I suppose like anything, will this be one of those things that people are just starting to accept it and it's starting to become the normal? Yeah. I mean, definitely the Trilly Kitty Clogher game that was on TG Carrick, that was great. I understand, especially the Kitty Clogher goalkeeper, the way he kind of stuck his penalty, and it is interesting the way it's cropped up in a lot of games, hasn't it, over the last while?
Yeah,
kind of around the country, you're seeing scorelines, and it's just becoming par for the course. I think it was a Wicklow semi-final was decided in the same manner over the weekend, so maybe it's one of those things that COVID has kind of brought it in, and it's just going to be accepted now.
Yeah, and it was Tinnahealy that won 4-3 on penalties against Avondale, now that you mention it. So it was Ryan McGee who hit that winning penalty for Warren Point, and they're back in the final after losing last year to Kilcoo. So the Cork Championship, your native championship, will start off with Castlehaven beating Illan Rovers 4-19 to 2-4. And again, what an embarrassment of riches to have up front for Castlehaven. Mark Collins scoring 2-3 and Brian Hurley 7 points. So I mean, hard for most teams to keep into them.
Yeah, absolutely. The big thing here was that it was the last day of the first year of the group stage matches being brought in Cork, so all games were on at the same time. So like my own club would have been involved in the Senior A Championship, and I know there was a load of permutations before the weekend that various teams had to, like, not alone win, but had to win by a certain number of points. Like there was a couple of grades where basically stuff in the last couple of minutes cost certain teams scores because of results elsewhere, and it was just like, it was brilliant. It was great excitement, and I mean this structure being brought in Cork, despite or previous to the the COVID shutdown. This had already been kind of agreed upon, and I definitely think cross football hurling has been a big success because I think it was a big problem. There's too many teams involved at the senior grade. I think splitting them to 12 was great. The group stage format being brought in, I think, has been a massive success. And I suppose one of the interesting things here was that basically Castlehaven, there's only one semi-final spot on offer, and then 6 teams go forward to the quarterfinals. So basically Castlehaven, Nima Rangers, St Finbarrs, 3 of the kind of biggest traditional sides, they were always really set to top the group, but it was always a case of who would kind of win by more on scoring difference to get through. So that big win over Castlehaven means they're straight through to the semi-finals, and the other teams have a quarter-final tie to negotiate first. One of the issues I think is going to arise now, though, is the volume of dual clubs that have kind of come through in Cork over the next, because of the fixture scheduling. So basically all the football knockout stages games have gone back a week. There was hope to maybe put a few of them this weekend, but because a lot of the clubs have hurling commitments, so I mean, like Cork aren't out in the football championship until the middle of November. They have a couple of league games, that game against Kerry. The hurling then, a lot of the guys hurling, Kieran Kingston's hurling squad, maybe a good few of them went hurling only this year, but a couple of them are still playing football. Like, I mean, the big game yesterday in terms of the big side that lost out was Carver Rangers, who were the 2016 champions. We had a guy like Luke Mead, who's probably known to a lot more people as just a wing forward in hurling, but he plays centre back in football for his club, like, and is really good, really important player for them. And they're now into a quarter final, like, so he is plenty kind of on his plate over the next while. And it probably just brings to mind, I think I'm pretty much in favour, I think, of the split season idea, but I just think it's going to be a lot easier for some counties to implement when you have just the one code. Obviously, there are issues like with clubs. I suppose some clubs do have enough players that they can kind of split it between a football or hurling squads, and you can maybe run them concurrently. But I definitely think the next few weeks will be interesting in terms of kind of the pressures that might tell on some clubs. I mean, a lot more, obviously, the other example aren't in Tipperary. So Cratloe over the last couple of years in Clare, but it's kind of going to be interesting to see how it kind of plays out and whether it has an impact on the fortunes of kind of county teams down the road.
In light of what we were saying about those hard semi-finals for Breaffy and Knockmore in Mayo and how that would have hardened them for their next round, is finishing top in the Cork Football Championship and getting that sole semi-final spot, is that a bit of a poison chalice in that you're then waiting and possibly going stale?
Yeah, I suppose the thing is, at least, okay, they won this game pretty easily, Castlehaven, but they had 2 tough enough group games. I think they'll probably be glad of maybe kind of the extra week's break, because a couple of their guys would have been playing hurling, the Catalans for St Finbarrs, so they've had an intense enough schedule. So I'd say it's no harm getting the week's break. And I just think the side now is that you're only one game away from a final. It just makes your path a lot easier. It's you're into the knockout stages now. A couple of the other big ones, they might kind of trip up. So to be honest, I think the way the schedule is this year, I think if you could get straight into the semi-finals like that, I think a lot of teams would take it. And I think it's Ken Rover's got the one on the hurling, and it just, the big advantage of it, I suppose, from kind of the wider perspective. I understand the concern you're expressing as regards the team itself, but it just meant everyone had something to play for. In terms of yesterday, because there was relegation, and it meant that if you kept getting scores and there was just no dead rubbers and all that, and I think on a wider sense, I think that's what every county board wants, isn't it? Whatever system they're putting in, that's the big fear of group games. They just don't want dead rubbers, because, like we saw in a wider sense, you see the Super 8s and the really kind of farcical and surreal nature of that Dublin Tyrone game. I remember in Oma last year, that's the real issue. If you put in a group format and that ends up in something like that there's no reward and there's nothing to play for, and you just have this really dead, strange kind of game where one team puts out kind of pretty much second choice team and wholesale changes. So that was probably the one good thing about having one semi-final place on offer.
And our Nemo Rangers as good as ever, 115 to 110 win over Douglas. Paul Kerrigan and Luke Connolly combined to score 9 points between them. And just within that as well, I just keep waiting for Douglas to actually come and deliver in either code.
Yeah, I mean, they on paper they have a lot of talent, and this year they kind of split it. They went solely hurling and football. There's no dual players involved.
Even the Cadigans.
So like Mark Collins. So no, yeah, the Cadigans are just playing hurling. Shane Kingston is just playing hurling. They're actually coached by Shane Brick, who would have played for Kerry. So yeah, they've only hurlers only this year. Like Mark Collins, for example, would have played hurling for them for the last couple of years. He's only played football with Castlehaven. So the hurlers did have a big win over Middleton, and they'd come through. But yeah, look, there's an abundance of talent, and there's an abundance of guys who have played for Cork at various levels. But they're gone out of the football now. Which is pretty disappointing for them. Again, at least the hurling was kind of a good return in kind of getting over the line. But yeah, like Nemo, I think are still the pace setters, and I suppose they have really been the dominant force over the last while. In Cork, totally no surprise, the likes of the Bars and Castlehaven are there to kind of challenge them. But it's definitely been a big issue, and I mean, like you've seen it in terms of some of the Munster Club Championship results, some of the hammerings that the likes of Dr. Crooks have handed out. Like Cork's standard has gone down in terms of Nemo kind of dominating, and maybe clubs just being happy enough with the odd club that picked up a county and not interested in kind of pushing forward like that thereafter. I mean, I know we've had this debate before, but kind of what is better for a county in terms of producing a team, maybe like a Corofin or a Nemo Rangers that kind of dominates, or a situation like Tyrone. I mean, I personally would think, just from the bits that I've been watching, I think this a form like the Tyrone Championship just seemed brilliant, that every game is kind of closely contested and loads of teams feel like they have a chance to win. Just think it kind of does more for you, and you kind of have a greater output at the end of it.
A couple of those other results from Cork: Ballincollig beat Carrigaline 2-8 to 11. Carbery Rangers, like you said, losing to Newcestown, which that Luke Meade plays, for 2-12 to 2-9. Finbars beat Clonakilty 117 to 113, and Valley Rovers edged out Bishopstown 12 points to 1-8. In Monaghan then, Scottstown beat Carrickmacross, getting to an 8 county final in a row. I mean, that's fairly impressive going, just in terms of durability of these players. Conor McCarthy throwing over 7 points.
Yeah, it's huge. I think like at the start of this run, they hadn't won the county in 20 years when they won it in 13. So that was like a big breakthrough at the time. But obviously, like, the names on paper, between like the Hugheses and Rory Began, and then obviously they've kind of had guys like Conor McCarthy come into it. Like, I mean, when you have that kind of amount of stars in the Monaghan ranks, and like I suppose one of the things I wonder about a team like that this year, they've been so used to winning county titles. They've come up short in a couple of Ulster finals. Did it take the edge off any bit your kind of drive and appetite? I mean, I know Ballygunner have been asked this in Waterford hurling. Without that kind of bigger prize you've been aiming for, your season stops at a certain point. Was that kind of going to affect it? But in fairness, it doesn't seem to have stopped Scottstown in terms of getting back to the final, having lost. I think they were going for 5 in a row last year. They lost out to Clontarf. So yeah, that it definitely looks like a pretty emphatic victory yesterday in comparison to the other game, which was the high scoring one and the more exciting.
Yeah, Ballybay are back for more 419 to 125 win over Oisin McConville's Inniskeen. It required extra time and a late goal from Shane McGuinness there. That's amazing scoring for football, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's a hurling scoring. It's a hurling scoring.
It really is, like,
Yeah.
And like, yeah, as you mentioned, obviously Oisin McConville involved, that would have been kind of interesting. The Inniskeen hadn't been in a final in a while, but Ballybay were in it 2 years ago, so it's two kind of probably familiar enough sides in the decider there.
Yeah, plenty of games in Offaly over the weekend. Road beat Capponcur, Eden Derry beat Brackna, Ferban beat Shamrocks. But your workmate there in the 42.ie, Kevin O'Brien, he was playing with Tullamore as they saw off Clara. So he wanted to keep it quiet, and therefore you decided we should shout loudly about it.
Well, I suppose we spent enough time looking for family stories and links. So yeah, he was playing yesterday, and Tullamore reached the county semi-finals, and his dad is the manager of St. Bridget's. He'd be kind of from Kiltoon and Roscommon, and they reached the county final. So good day out for the family in terms of kind of both in them getting to the knockout stages. But it's interesting the way, I suppose maybe they had less clubs involved, but the way Offaly, even despite the kind of mini lockdown, the 2-week gap, that they've already managed to get straight to the semi-final stage with the end of those group stage matches yesterday. And I think it was kind of scoring difference kind of got Tullamore into it in the end. So Will O'Callaghan from Off the Ball and Midlands 103 talking about that I think it was kind of tight enough averages all through between 3 clubs, and then Road were always going to, I think, top the group there. I think there's a Senior B format in Offaly as well, is there? I think that there's 8 clubs, 8 Senior A football and 8 Senior B, but in terms of, despite the challenge that they face with that shutdown, they've still kind of managed to engineer and progress pretty quickly in terms of getting to the semi-final stage, and that should give them a bit of a kind of free run on the inter-county side of things in terms of getting ready for the league and the Leinster Championship.
And there's so many other games we could look at across the country, but just to quickly run over Roscommon there, seeing as you mention it, and the Kevin O'Brien link. St. Bridget's beat Boyle 2-15 to 2-9, and then Pádraig Pearse's beat Clonagale, where Donny Shine only came off the bench 111 to 110. So that's another nice little final there. Pádraig Pearse is the defending champions up against Bridget's.
Yeah, and like Pearse's were one of the big breakthroughs, weren't they, last year, because of the finals they'd lost and finally get over the line. But I think it would really kind of back that up if they were to win a final and it was against Bridget's, because they definitely lost to them in one final, I think it's 16, if not a couple. But I mean, if you did back to back, it would really kind of banish all maybe accusations that it was a complete one-off last year or whatever. And then if you did it against this side who have kind of dominated the last decade. But the thing is about Bridges, just looking at the team, it's not very recognisable to someone outside the county who would have maybe been following them around the time when they were winning the All-Ireland club. And it probably definitely shows that whatever transition, however tricky that was and unpredictable it was, they seem to have managed it okay anyway in terms of kind of bringing in new guys to the setup. But yeah, it's a kind of recognisable enough county final pairing in Roscommon looking ahead in a couple of weeks' time.
Great stuff, Fintan. We'll chat again.
No worries, Shane.